Number 10. Marshall Applewhite. As a young man, Applewhite attended several universities and served in the US Army. He initially pursued a career in education until he resigned from the University of St. Thomas in Houston, Texas in 1970, citing emotional turmoil. His father's passing a year later brought on severe depression. In 1972, Applewhite developed a close relationship with Bonnie Nettles, a nurse. Together, they discussed mysticism at length and concluded that they were called as divine messengers. They operated a bookstore and teaching center for a short while and then began to travel around the US in 1973 to spread their views. They gained only one convert. In 1975, Applewhite was arrested for failing to return a rental car and was jailed for 6 months. In jail, he further developed his theology. After Applewhite's release, he and Nettles traveled to California and Oregon, eventually gaining a group of committed followers. They told their followers that they would be visited by extraterrestrials who would provide them with new bodies. Applewhite initially stated that he and his followers would physically ascend to a spaceship where their bodies would be transformed, but later he came to believe that their bodies were the mere containers of their souls, which would later be placed into new bodies. These ideas were expressed with language drawn from Christian eschatology, the New Age movement, and American pop culture. Number 9. David Berg. David Berg, along with his wife and children, founded the organization known as the Teens for Christ, operating out of Light Club Coffee House in Huntington Beach, California in 1968. While in California, after receiving strong resistance from local churches due to his followers picketing them, he took the whole group of 40 to 100 people on the road. It was while they were camped in Lewis and Clark Park that a news reporter first called them the Children of God. In the mid-1970s, Berg began preparing his followers for a revelation he had about flirty fishing or winning important, influential men through escort. In 1975, after letting everyone know via one of his letters that his mistress Maria, or Karen Zerby, gave birth to a so-called Jesus baby, which is what cult members called babies born within the cult, Berg changed the name to Family of Love, or The Family. Eventually, in 1991, this was changed to The Family International. Berg lived in seclusion, communicating with his followers and the public via nearly 3,000 Mo letters, Mo from his pseudonym Moses David, that he wrote on a wide variety of subjects. These typically covered spiritual or practical subjects and were used as a way of disseminating and introducing policy and religious doctrine to his followers. Berg's letters admonished the reader to love the sinner but hate the sin. His writings were often extreme and uncompromising in their denunciation of what he believed to be evil, such as mainstream churches, capitalism, and Jewish people. Number 8. David Miscavige. David Miscavige is the leader of the Church of Scientology and, according to the organization, captain of the Sea Org. His official title within the organization is chairman of the board of the Religious Technology Center, RTC, a corporation that controls the trademarks and copyrights of Dianetics and Scientology. Miscavige was a deputy to Scientology founder L. Ron Hubbard as a teenager. He joined the Sea Org, a management group for the Scientology organization, then later joined the Commodore's Messenger organization, a group within the Sea Org that carried Hubbard's orders to subordinates. He rose to a leadership position by the early 1980s and was named chairman of the board of RTC in 1987, the year after Hubbard's passing. Official Church of Scientology biographies describe Miscavige as the ecclesiastical leader of the Scientology religion. Since he assumed his leadership position, there have been a number of allegations made against Miscavige. These include claims of human trafficking, slavery, forced separation of family members, coercive fundraising practices, harassment of journalists and Church of Scientology critics, and emotional and physical abuse of subordinates by Miscavige. Miscavige and spokespersons for the organization deny the majority of these claims, often making derogatory comments and attacking the credibility of those who bring them. Miscavige has been investigated by the Federal Bureau of Investigation due to allegations of criminal activities within the Scientology organization. Number 7. Father Divine. Father Divine, also known as Reverend M.J. Divine, was a spiritual leader from about 1907 until his passing in 1965. His full self-given name was Reverend Major Jealous Divine, and he was also known as the Messenger early in his life. He founded the International Peace Mission movement, formed its doctrine, and oversaw its growth from a small congregation into an international church. Due to his ideology, many consider him to be a cult leader. Father Divine claimed to be God. He made numerous contributions toward his followers' economic independence and racial equality. He was a contemporary of other religious leaders such as Daddy Grace, Charles Harrison Mason, Noble Drew Ali, Wallace Fard Muhammad, Elijah Muhammad, and Jim Jones. A jury found him guilty on June 5th, but asked for leniency on behalf of Father Divine. Ignoring the jury's request, Justice Smith lectured on how Father Divine was a fraud and menace to society, before issuing the maximum sentence for disturbing the peace, 1 year in prison and a $500 fine. Smith, 55, passed away of a heart attack just days after the conviction on June 9, 1932. Father Divine was widely reported to have commented on the passing, saying, "I hated to do it," he wrote to his followers. "I did not desire Judge Smith to pass. I did desire that my spirit would touch his heart and change his mind, that he might repent and believe and be saved from the grave." That's some scary stuff, man. Number 6, Glenn Helzer. Glenn Helzer and his brother Justin met Don Godman on Memorial Day 1999 at an execution mystery themed dinner hosted by a Mormon congregation in Walnut Creek, California. Godman became Justin's girlfriend and moved into a house in Concord with the Helzer brothers in April 2000. Glenn Helzer was excommunicated from the LDS Church in 1998 due to his substance use. Around this time, he declared himself a prophet. He developed a list of maxims he called the 12 Principles of Magic, by which he expected his followers to abide. He had plans to train Brazilian orphans to assassinate Mormon leaders so that he could take over the LDS Church and start a self-help group called Transform America, which was intended to create a state of peace and joy. Helzer collectively referred to himself and his followers as the Children of Thunder. To finance his plans, Helzer developed a scheme to extort money from Ivan and Annette Steinman, an elderly couple in Concord, California, who had been Helzer's clients when he was employed as a stockbroker. On July 30th, 2000, the Helzer brothers and Godman kidnapped the Steinmans and forced them to write checks for $100,000 before executing them. The trio then removed Glenn Helzer's girlfriend, Selena Bishop, on August 2nd in order to prevent her from potentially providing information that could lead to his arrest. To extort the Steinmans' money, Helzer convinced Bishop, who knew him as Jordan, to open bank accounts in her name for Helzer's use. He told her that he was inheriting a large sum of money which he needed to hide from his ex-wife. Number 5, Jim Jones. James Warren Jones was an American preacher, political activist, and mass slaughterer. He led the People's Temple, a new religious movement between 1955 and 1978. In what he called revolutionary self-life-taking, Jones and the members of his inner circle orchestrated a mass slaughter self-execution in his remote jungle commune at Jonestown, Guyana on November 18, 1978. Jones and the events which occurred at Jonestown have had a defining influence on society's perception of cults. Jones founded the organization that would become the People's Temple in Indianapolis in 1955. In 1956, Jones began to be influenced by Father Divine and the Peace Mission movement. Jones distinguished himself through civil rights activism, founding the temple as a fully integrated congregation and promoting socialism. In 1964, Jones joined and was ordained a minister by the Disciples of Christ. His attraction to the disciples was largely due to the autonomy and tolerance they granted to differing views within their denomination. Number 4, Larry Ray. In 2010, Brooklyn native Lawrence V. Larry Ray, born Lawrence Greco, following his release from prison, resided in the on-campus apartment of his daughter, Talia Ray. Sarah Lawrence College later told New York Magazine that it was not aware that he had been living on campus. While there, Ray started an intimacy cult in which he presented himself to students as a psychology and spiritual advisor. In 2011, he induced some students to move into his Manhattan apartment. In February 2020, he was charged by prosecutors in Manhattan with conspiracy, extortion, intimacy trafficking, forced labor, and other related offenses, following nearly 10 years of alleged transgressions with students and former students. At a bail hearing held March 2nd, 2020, an assistant U.S. attorney disclosed to the Manhattan federal court that Ray had been arrested while in bed with one of his victims. Bail was denied. Defense attorneys argued Ray, who was diagnosed with narcissistic personality disorder and histrionic personality disorder, was influenced by his psychological problems. Ray was convicted on all counts on April 6, 2022. Number 3, Magdalena Solis. Fearing the repercussions, other members informed Solis and the Hernandez brothers who ran the cult before Solis of 2 people who wanted to leave, with the former decreeing that the heretics be sacrificed. After these first 2 executions, Solis's crimes gradually escalated in violence and brutality. As she was bored with simple parties, she began to demand human sacrifices and devised a blood ritual. The sacrificed, who was always a dissenting member, was brutally beaten, burned, cut, and mutilated by all members of the cult before being left to bleed to passing. The blood was then deposited in a chalice mixed with chicken blood and narcotics, from which Solace drank, before passing it along to the brothers and finally to other members. This supposedly gave them supernatural abilities, and at the end of the ritual, the victim's heart was ripped out. Based on their beliefs of Aztec mythology, Solis and the Hernandez brothers proclaimed that blood is the only food that gods can ingest, and that their goddess needed to drink it to preserve their eternal youth. The carnage lasted 6 continuous weeks, during which 4 people passed and had their hearts extracted post-mortem. Number 2, Tony Quinn. During an early seminar Quinn held in 1994, he revealed thoughts on his purpose. He spoke about how he did not know if he was starting a cult, and how he felt his purpose could be to work with millions of people. He stated he required followers to submit totally to him and to not resist. He talked about being able to determine the thoughts you have, likening them to computer programs that together form a personality that is not yourself. Quinn teaches his Educo model on the 10-day remote overseas seminars, which the Educo World website concludes from a statistical sample, an increase of turnover of 62% in the first year, 108% in the second year, 190% in the third year, a total of 360%. Average income to increase 88% each year, a total of 264% over 3 years. Achieving goals 67% increase over 3 years, a 32% average life satisfaction increase after 3 to 6 months, measured as 55% after 3 years. Quinn's Educo model incorporated the 10% of the brain myth, which suggests that we don't use all of our brain, which was disputed by Chiron Benson, a professor of psychology at University College Dublin, who said Quinn's claims are simplistic in the extreme and without any acceptable research. Quinn has said now it's sometimes said to be as little as 1 to 3% with regard to usage of the human brain, and has likened the mind to a computer which has been ruined by thought programs. Number 1, Charles Manson. Charles Mills Manson was an American criminal and musician who led the Manson family, a cult based in California in the late 1960s. Some of the members committed a series of 9 executions at 4 locations in July and August 1969. In 1971, Manson was convicted of first-degree slaughter and conspiracy to commit execution for the removals of 7 people, including the film actress Sharon Tate. The prosecution contended that while Manson never directly ordered the executions, his ideology constituted an overt act of conspiracy. Before the slaughters, Manson had spent more than half of his life in correctional institutions. While gathering his cult following, Manson was a singer-songwriter on the fringe of the Los Angeles music industry, chiefly through a chance association with Dennis Wilson of the Beach Boys, who introduced Manson to record producer Terry Melcher. In 1968, the Beach Boys recorded Manson's song Cease to Exist, renamed Never Learn Not to Love, as a single B-side, but without a credit to Manson. Afterward, Manson attempted to secure a record contract through Melcher, but was unsuccessful. Number 10, Karla Homolka and Paul Bernardo. The pair of criminals first met in 1987, where the veterinary technician Karla Homolka was introduced to the cigarette smuggler Paul Bernardo. Before the pair met up, Paul had violated more than 10 people. Between the years 1990 and 1992, Homolka and Bernardo ended the lives of and violated 3 women, including Homolka's sister. Paul Bernardo is currently serving life in prison for the crimes, but Karla Homolka got an amazing deal from the courts and only served 12 years for her involvement in the crimes. Homolka is now free, married, and has 3 children. The pair were known as the Ken and Barbie Butchers while they were active, and I'm not totally sure why, because the two were kinda butters in my opinion. Number 9, Christine Paolilla and Chris Snyder. In 2003, 17-year-old Christine Paolilla met 21-year-old Christopher Lee Snyder the same year that Paolilla was voted Miss Irresistible by her classmates. The two began dating and fell into a life of substance abuse. On July 18th of that year, Paolilla and Snyder went to Paolilla's friend's house in order to steal substances, but after an argument ensued, the couple shot and ended the lives of the 4 people in the house, 2 of Paolilla's best friends and their boyfriends, and went on the run. It would be almost 3 years until police apprehended Paolilla for the crime. Paolilla was sentenced to life in prison with the chance of parole in 2046, and Snyder overdosed on a needle substance before he was able to be charged. Taking the easy way out, huh? Number 8, Jasmine Richardson and Jeremy Stank. In 2006, Jasmine Richardson met Jeremy Stenck, a self-proclaimed 300-year-old vampire, at a punk rock concert. The two began dating, much to the outrage and chagrin of Richardson's parents. The two grounded her and forbade her from seeing Stenck ever again. So, in retaliation, on the night of April 22, 2006, Richardson and Stenck ended the lives of Richardson's parents and her brother. While Stenck was sentenced to 3 concurrent life sentences for 3 counts of first-degree butchery, since Richardson was a minor, her maximum sentence was only 10 years, including time served. She was released in 2016. That's an extreme reaction to being grounded. Your parents took the time to raise you and that's what you do? Everyone watching this video, make sure to tell your parents you love them today. Show them you care. Number 7, Bailey Boswell and Aubrey Trail. In 2017, 23-year-old Bailey Boswell and 50-year-old Aubrey Trail lured Sydney Loof to her passing. Initially, Loof thought she was going on a date with Boswell, whom she met on Tinder, but in actuality, she was a targeted victim of this couple. Loof's remains were found throughout 16 garbage bags, and not long after, Boswell and Trail were arrested. Trail was found guilty of first-degree slaughter, conspiracy to commit slaughter, and improper disposal of human remains, and was sentenced to execution. Bailey, who was also found guilty, is currently waiting to hear if she will be sentenced to life in prison or to execution. Stay safe on those dating apps, fellas. I personally don't have to worry because I get no matches anyways. Number 6, Martha Beck and Raymond Fernandez. In 1947, conman Raymond Fernandez responded to Martha Beck's Lonely Hearts ad in the paper. After realizing she wasn't as rich as he surmised, he's a gold digger, he left her. However, Beck still pursued Fernandez into 1948. He finally told her that he was a con man and swindled women out of their money. But instead of running away, Beck asked to become his accomplice. The two went on to swindle and remove between 3 to 17 women over the next year, under the guise of being brother and sister. Beck and Fernandez were found guilty of first-degree slaughter and sentenced to execution via electric chair. They both passed away in 1951. The two were known as the Lonely Hearts Butchers. Now that's what I call wholesome. Just two folks who don't really romantically like each other getting together for some extracurricular activities. Number 5, Sarah Jane and John Mackin. In 1871, Sarah Jane and John Mackin married and went on to have 10 children together. Sometime in the late 1880s, John lost his job, so he and Sarah became baby farmers, caring for illegitimate children in exchange for money, a precursor to foster care, if you will, to a number of infants. In 1893, the Mackins were found guilty of slaughtering Horace Murray, but after further investigation, police discovered the corpses of at least 12 bodies on their property, who the police believe the Mackins received payment for after their passings. John Mackin was sentenced to execution and Sarah Mackin was sentenced to life in prison but was paroled in 1911. These people were absolutely deranged. Then again, anyone who calls themselves a baby farmer should definitely be ashamed of themselves at the very least. At least a little teased, you know? Why make it so weird? At number 4, Henry Lee Lucas and Otis Toole. In 1976, Henry Lee Lucas and Otis Toole, two men who were abused by their mothers and forced to dress up as little girls, started a relationship after bonding over their childhood abuse. Soon after, they discovered their taste for blood and began torturing and executing innocent victims together. The two later separated and were apprehended separately for other crimes. Both Lucas and Toole confessed to hundreds of executions, but only 3 and 6 victims were confirmed respectively. Lucas and Toole were both sentenced to life in prison and passed in prison in 2001 and 1996 respectively. I almost felt bad for these guys because of their childhood, but it's actually proven that childhood trauma is super common in serial executioners. I feel like it's just so normal for the criminals to have family problems that it's beyond sympathy. What do you guys think? At number 3, Inessa Tarverdieva and Roman Podkapayev. This one is absolutely wild. Inessa Tarverdieva, her second husband Roman Podkapayev, and her daughters, Victoria and Anastasia, are a family of serial butchers. In 2013, the family was apprehended, and it was discovered that they ended the lives of at least 30 people and stole thousands of dollars. Upon searching their home, police found over 20 firearms inside. Podkapayev was ended in a police shootout, but Inessa, Victoria, and Anastasia were sentenced to 16 to 21 years in prison for their crimes. I told you it was crazy. Even if you're running a family-run business of chopping up people like cilantro and stealing their Parmesan, why would you ever need 20 firearms? Does each family member have 5 favorites or something? Is it like a tasting menu for torture? Who knows? Number 2, Gwendolyn Graham and Kathy Wood. In 1987, Gwendolyn Graham and Kathy Wood, who was married to a man at the time, were nurses' aides in Michigan who ended the lives of 5 of their elderly patients from their nursing home. According to Wood, Graham would execute the patients and then have intimate relations with her as a way to relieve tension. In an exchange for a lesser sentence, Wood testified against Graham, who was found guilty and sentenced to life in prison. Wood received a sentence of 20 to 40 years and was released in 2020. This might be controversial, but I'm just saying. Executing the elderly is being a serial butcher on easy mode. There's no thrill in the chase or anything. Maybe I've been working on this channel for too long. At number 1, what list would be incomplete without Bonnie and Clyde? In 1930, 19-year-old Bonnie Parker met 21-year-old Clyde Barrow. The next couple of years, Barrow spent in and out of prison, but once he was released in 1932, their crime spree began. Even though they're most known for their numerous robberies of banks and small stores, they also put up to 9 cops and 4 civilians in the dirt. On May 13, 1934, police officers and Texas Rangers opened fire on Parker and Barrow as they were leaving their hideout. They were shot and executed instantly. These two have been the inspiration for so many copycats that it's hard to believe they passed in such a mundane way. Sure, it's kind of crazy to be instantly eliminated as soon as you walk outside, but they didn't fight back or anything. Number 10, Volney Curley Davis. Davis was born in Brooklyn Park, Minnesota, and was seemingly raised to be a bad boy. At the age of just 17, Davis was arrested for the first time in 1919 for stealing a pair of shoes. The grand larcenist was an early member of the Minnesota-based Central Park gang during the 20s, where he met the Barker gang and committed his first major robbery when he and an associate burglarized St. John's Hospital in Brooklyn Park. I'm not sure of the practicality of robbing a hospital instead of a bank, but to each their own, I guess. The night watchman of the hospital was executed during the robbery, and Davis was sentenced to life imprisonment for the execution. Curley escaped prison at McAllister during a mass escape and was recaptured, then escaped again before being sent to Alcatraz. Number 9. Al Scarface Al Capone. Alphonse Gabriel Capone, sometimes known by the nickname Scarface, was an American gangster and businessman who attained notoriety during the Prohibition era as the co-founder and boss of the Chicago Outfit. The Chicago Outfit was an Italian-American organized crime syndicate based in Chicago, Illinois. Capone was widely assumed to have been responsible for ordering the 1929 St. Valentine's Day Massacre, despite being at his Florida home at the time of the tragedy. The massacre was an attempt to eliminate Bugs Moran, head of the Northside Gang, and the motivation for the plan may have been the fact that some expensive beverage, illegally imported from Canada via the Detroit River, had been hijacked while it was being transported to Cook County, Illinois. On March 27, 1929, Capone was arrested by FBI agents as he left a Chicago courtroom after testifying to a grand jury that was investigating violations of federal prohibition laws. He was charged with contempt of court for feigning illness to avoid an earlier appearance. Number 8. James Whitey Bulger. James Joseph Bulger Jr. was an American organized crime boss who led the Winter Hill Gang in the Winter Hill neighborhood of Somerville, Massachusetts, a city directly northwest of Boston. In 1956, Bulger served his first term in federal prison at Atlanta Penitentiary for armed robbery and truck hijack. In 1959, Bulger was briefly transferred to maximum security at Alcatraz Federal Penitentiary in California. Later in his sentence, he was transferred to Leavenworth Federal Penitentiary and, in 1963, to Lewisburg Federal Penitentiary. On December 23, 1994, Bulger fled the Boston area and went into hiding after his former FBI handler, John Connolly, tipped him off about a pending RICO indictment against him. Bulger remained at large for 16 years. After his 2011 arrest, federal prosecutors tried Bulger for 19 executions based on grand jury testimony from Kevin Weeks and other former criminal associates. Number 7. Arthur Doc Barker. Arthur R. Barker was an American criminal and member of the Barker Karpus gang founded by his brother Fred Barker and Alvin Karpus. Arthur Barker was known as the hitman of the gang. His brother and Karpus would plan the attacks, and all Arthur did was execute them. He was arrested and convicted of kidnapping in 1936 and was executed while trying to escape Alcatraz Federal Penitentiary. Barker is described by one writer as a dimwit and a drunk who was not much more than a brutal thug. However, fellow Alcatraz inmate Henry Young said of him that he was determined and ruthless, and that once he started on anything, nothing can stop him but passing. Number 6. Basil the Owl Banghart. Basil Hugh Banghart Jr. was an American criminal, burglar, and prison escape artist. Although a successful stick-up artist during the 1920s and early 1930s, he is best remembered for his involvement in the hoax kidnapping of Chicago mobster Jake the Barber Factor, a crime for which Roger Toohey and he were eventually proven innocent after nearly 20 years in prison. After years of unsuccessful appeals, Banghart and Toohey escaped Joliet with Edward Durlack, Martlick Nelson, William Stewart, St. Clair McInerney, and James O'Connor on October 9, 1942. The convicts were given even longer jail sentences for their escape, and on January 2, 1943, Bankhart was returned to Stateville, where he was placed in solitary confinement. He was then transferred with an escort of 18 federal marshals to Alcatraz. Number 5. Harvey Bailey, aka the Dean of American Bank Robbers. Born in West Virginia, Bailey robbed his first bank around the time of 1921 and his last in Kingfisher, Oklahoma on September 9, 1933. He was incarcerated in Dallas on July 8, 1932 until he escaped on June 1, 1933 during a breakout in which the warden was kidnapped and used as a human shield. He was recaptured and found guilty of complicity in the Urschel kidnapping and was sentenced to life in prison on October 7, 1933. Originally sent to Leavenworth, he was transferred to Alcatraz on September 1, 1934. He was returned to Leavenworth in 1946 and transferred in 1960 to Seagoville Federal Correctional Institution in Texas, where he remained until he was released on March 30, 1964. While active, Harvey Bailey was one of the most successful bank robbers during the 20s and collected over $1 million in stolen funds. Number 4. Theodore Ted Cole. On December 16, 1937, a dense fog swept through the San Francisco Bay, impeding marine traffic and reducing visibility to near zero on Alcatraz Island. Cole and Rowe, both convicted bank robbers in Oklahoma, had been caught during earlier independent escape attempts from that state's McAllister prison. As escape risks, they were both incarcerated in high-security Leavenworth prison, then transferred to higher-security Alcatraz in 1936. They were given jobs working in the prison's mash shop, a facility at the northernmost point of the island. Cole and Rowe were working in the mash shop. A routine head count at 1 p.m. showed all prisoners accounted for. At the next count at 1:30 p.m., the two men were gone. 2 iron bars and 3 heavy glass panes of a window in the shop had a hole 22 centimeters high and 46 centimeters long. Once through the window, they slipped down to the gate of a high wire fence, concealed by the fog. With a wrench taken from the tire shop, they forced the gate lock and dropped 20 feet to a beach. Their trail vanished at that point. Number 3. Meyer Mickey Cohen. During Prohibition, Cohen moved to Chicago and became involved in organized crime, working as an enforcer for the Chicago outfit, where he briefly met Al Capone. During this period, Cohen was arrested for his role in the executions of several gangsters in a card game. In 1939, Cohen arrived in Los Angeles to work under Benjamin Bugsy Siegel. During their association, Cohen helped set up the Flamingo Hotel in Las Vegas and ran its sportsbook operation. In 1957, Time magazine wrote a brief article about Cohen's meeting with evangelist Billy Graham. Cohen said, "I am very high on the Christian way of life." Billy came up and before we had food, he said, "What do you call it? That thing they say before food? Grace? Yeah, grace." Then we talked a lot about Christianity and stuff. Allegedly, when Cohen did not change his lifestyle, he was confronted by Christian acquaintances. His response was this: Christian football players, Christian cowboys, Christian politicians, why not a Christian gangster? Cohen was convicted of tax evasion and sent to Alcatraz. Number 2. James C. Lucas, aka Texas bank robber. Lucas was originally sentenced to 30 years imprisonment for robbing First National Bank in Albany, Texas, in violation of the Dyer Act, interstate trafficking of stolen vehicles. He arrived in Alcatraz in January 1935 from the Texas State Prison and was known there as James Texas Bank Robber Lucas. James Lucas, along with 2 other inmates, were involved in an escape attempt in the spring of 1938. They enacted their escape plan on May 23, 1938 in the prison's mash shop, where they assaulted custodial officer Royal Klein with hammer blows to his head. They proceeded to the roof, where armed guard Harold Stites shot both Franklin and Limerick, although Lucas wasn't shot. Other guards arrived at the scene. Franklin, Limerick, and Lucas were cornered and surrendered to the guards. Number 1. George Kelly Barnes, aka Machine Gun Kelly. Barnes, better known by his pseudonym Machine Gun Kelly, was an American gangster from Memphis, Tennessee, active during the Prohibition era. His nickname came from his favorite weapon, a Thompson submachine gun. He is best known for the kidnapping of oil tycoon and businessman Charles F. Urschel in July 1933, from which he and his gang collected a $200,000 ransom. Urschel had collected and left considerable evidence that assisted the subsequent FBI investigation, which eventually led to Kelly's arrest in Memphis, Tennessee on September 26, 1933. His crimes also included bootlegging and armed robbery. The kidnapping of Urschel and the 2 trials that resulted were historic in several ways. They were the first federal criminal trials in the United States in which film cameras were allowed, the first kidnapping trials after the passing of the Lindbergh Law, which made kidnapping a federal crime, the first major case solved by J. Edgar Hoover's FBI, and the first prosecution in which defendants were transported by airplane. Machine Gun Kelly spent his remaining 21 years in prison. I personally sold my soul for my music career to blow up, but I think I got scammed. I'm your host Yusuf, and these are 10 criminals who sold their soul to the devil. Make sure you subscribe and ring that bell to get notified whenever we upload a new video. Oh, and make sure to stick around for number 1 because this guy is, well, he's a lot. Number 10, Susan Atkins. Before we get started, for context, Atkins was a member of the Manson family cult. During the summer of 1969, Manson and his commune at Spawn's Ranch were attracting the attention of the police, who suspected them of auto theft and were suspicious of the high number of runaways. In an attempt to raise money to move away to the desert, Manson encouraged substance stealing. Purportedly, a botched substance scam by family member Charles Tex Watson led Manson to confront and shoot a man named Bernard Lotzapapa Crow. Manson believed he had slaughtered Crow, and he further believed Crow was a Black Panther. Neither was true. Nonetheless, Manson feared retaliation from the Black Panthers and pressured his followers for money. During this time, someone suggested that family acquaintance Gary Hinman had just inherited a large sum of money. Manson hoped Hinman could be persuaded to join the commune and contribute his purported new inheritance. Manson sent Atkins, Bobby Beausoleil, and Mary Brunner to Hinman's home on July 25, 1969. When Hinman said that he had not inherited any money, Beausoleil beat him severely. When Hinman still insisted that he had no inheritance, Manson showed up in person and swung at his head with a sword, slicing his face and severely cutting his ear. Manson directed Atkins and Brunner to stay behind and tend to Hinman's wounds. 2 days later, and after a phone call from Manson, Beausoleil and Hinman sign over the registrations to his cars and then fatally stabbed him twice. Beausoleil left a bloody handprint on the wall along with the words "political piggy," reportedly placed there in hopes of implicating the Black Panthers. Beausoleil was arrested on August 7, 1969, when he was found asleep in one of Hinman's vehicles. He was still wearing the blood-stained clothing he wore during the crime. The execution weapon was hidden in the tire well of the car's trunk. In 1977, Atkins published her autobiography, Child of Satan, Child of God, in which she recounted the time she spent with Manson and the family, her religious conversion, and her prison experiences. Number 9, the Kyler's Park Butchers. On the 23rd of July, 1997, at around 4:30 p.m., a guide discovered the body of a man laying face down at the base of an old water tower in Kyler's Park in downtown Gothenburg. Called on site, the police determined that the man had been shot twice with a pistol. The first bullet hit him in the back and went through his heart, while the second was fired to his head as he lay on the ground. A bag and a head cap were recovered beside the body. When the arrests were made on 15th and 18th of December 1997, the police discovered satanic altars in the homes of 2 suspects. A human skull was also found at one of their places, for which he was charged with possession of human parts. The 2 were members of a satanic organization called Misanthropic Luciferian Order, of which Vlad was one of his founders, and that, according to the police, never had more than a handful of followers. During their investigations, the police interrogated former members of the MLO who discovered the organization and narrated the cult ceremonies they had attended. Rituals included meditation, invocation of demons, and animal sacrifices. Number 8, the Ripper Crew. The Ripper Crew, or the Chicago Rippers, was a satanic cult and organized crime group composed of serial executioners, cannibals, and necrophiles. The crew consisted of Robin Gecht and 3 associates, Edward Spreitzer and brothers Andrew and Thomas Kokorales. They were suspected in the disappearance of 17 women in Illinois in 1981 and 1982, as well as the unrelated fatal shooting of a man in a random drive-by shooting. According to one of the detectives who investigated the case, Gecht made Manson look like a Boy Scout. The gang's first victim was 28-year-old Linda Sutton, who was abducted on May 23, 1981. 10 days later, her body was found in a field in Villa Park, Illinois. Her body had been mutilated and disfigured. It was almost a year before the gang struck again. On May 15, 1982, they abducted Lorraine Borowski, just as she was about to open the realtor's office where she worked. Her body was discovered 5 months later in a cemetery in Clarendon Hills. On May 29th, they abducted Shui Mock from Hanover Park. Her body was not found for 4 months. 2 weeks after they had abducted Mack, they picked up Angel York in their van, handcuffed her, and slashed her before throwing her out of the van, still alive. York's description of her attackers failed to produce any leads, and they eventually got caught, but these perps were truly heinous. Number 7. Krista Pike. Krista Gale Pike is an American convicted executioner and the youngest woman to be sentenced to execution in the United States during the post-Furman period. She was 20 when convicted of torture execution of her classmate Colleen Slemmer, which she committed at the age of 18. Here's the story. Pike lived a troubled life and dropped out of high school. She joined the Job Corps, a government program aimed at helping low-income youth by offering vocational training and career skills, and attended the now closed Job Corps Center in Knoxville, Tennessee. Pike began dating a man a year younger than her named Tataril Ship. Together, they developed interest in the occult and devil worship. Krista became jealous of her friend, university student 19-year-old Colleen Slemmer, who she thought was trying to steal her boyfriend from her. Friends of Slemmer denied the accusations. Along with friend Shadola Peterson, 18, Pike planned to lure Slemmer to an isolated abandoned steam plant near the University of Tennessee campus. On January 12, 1995, Pike, Ship, Peterson, and Slemmer signed out of the dormitory and proceeded to the woods, where Slemmer was told that they wanted to make peace by offering her some substances. Upon arrival at the secluded location, Slemmer was attacked by Pike and Ship, while Peterson acted as lookout. According to later court testimony, for the next 30 minutes, Slemmer was taunted, beaten, and slashed. A pentagram was carved in her chest. Finally, Pike smashed Slemmer's skull with a large chunk of asphalt, ending her, and Pike kept a piece of Slemmer's skull as a trophy. Number 6. Veronica Pietrobelli, Milena de Giambattista, and Ambra Gianasso. Maria Laura Minetti was an Italian Catholic sister from the Sisters of the Cross Institute. Mother Superior of a convent in Chiavenna that specialized in helping juvenile delinquents, she was stabbed to passing in a satanic sacrifice by 3 teenage girls on the night of June 6, 2000. Minetti's passing was declared a martyrdom by the Congregation for the Causes of Saints in 2020, and she was beatified on the 6th of June 2021, the 21st anniversary of her passing. Around 10 o'clock on the 6th of June 2000, Minetti left her convent in Chiavenna and went to a local public square to meet a girl who had recently requested an appointment via telephone. There, Minetti encountered the girl, Veronica Pietrobelli, and the latter's friends. The 3 girls lured Minetti down a nearby street to a secluded area outside a park where they ambushed her, stoning and shouting abuse at her before taking turns in stabbing her with a kitchen knife that De Giambattista was carrying. Minetti prayed as she was being attacked, asking God to forgive the girls before passing away after being stabbed 19 times. Even in her passing, Minetti was true to what she believed in. Hope she's up there somewhere. Number 5. Rod Farrell. Roderick Justin Rod Farrell is an American butcher and cult leader. He was a member of a loose-knit gang of teenagers from Murray, Kentucky known as the Vampire Clan. Farrell claimed to be a 500-year-old vampire named Visago, a character he created for himself after being obsessed with the role-playing game Vampire the Masquerade. It was his mother, Sandra Gibson, who first introduced this game to Rod. In 1998, Farrell pleaded guilty to the double slaying of a couple from Eustis, Florida, becoming the youngest person in Florida on Demise Row at that time. Originally sentenced to execution, Farrell's penalty has since been reduced to life imprisonment. On November 25, 1996, Naomi Ruth Queen and Richard Wendorf were found by their daughter, Jennifer Wendorf, beaten in their Eustis home. While 49-year-old Richard Wendorf was asleep on his couch and Ruth was in the shower, Farrell and an accomplice, Howard Scott Anderson, had entered the home through the unlocked garage, picking up the weapon, a crowbar. Before Richard had even awakened, Farrell beat him several times with it, fracturing both his skull and ribs, almost instantly knocking him out and ending him shortly after. When Ruth had found Farrell and Anderson in the home moments later, Farrell bludgeoned her, bashing her head with the crowbar. He claimed in his confession, however, that in his original plan he was going to allow Naomi Ruth to live, but she first attacked him by lunging at him and throwing a very hot cup of coffee on him, which angered him and made him change his mind, and so he removed her also. I guess a cup of coffee really changes a person. Number 4. Jason Massey. Massey was born on January 7th, 1973 in Ellis County, Texas. He was neglected and abused by his drink-addicted father and his substance-addicted mother. By his teens, he was a juvenile delinquent with a lengthy criminal record, mostly for torturing animals and stalking. His mother once committed him to a psychiatric hospital after discovering his journals, in which he detailed his fantasies about abuse and termination, his hero worship of Charles Manson, his avowed Satanism, and his strong desire to become a serial butcher. Massey was also known to decapitate and mutilate dogs, cats, and cows, preserving their skulls in coolers as trophies. On July 27, 1993, Massey ended 2 people, James Brian King and his stepsister, Christina Christina Benjamin in his hometown. He cut off Christina's head and hands and removed her intestines. He shot King twice in the head. On July 29th, both their bodies were found in a field near Tellico by a road worker. There was evidence of mutilation and some of the body parts were missing, which have never been found. Number 3. Jarno Elg. Jarno Sebastian Elg is a Finnish Satanist portrayed as a devil worshipper by medias who was sentenced to life in prison for ending a 23-year-old man, eating some of the body parts, and instigating others to participate in a ritual that included torturing the victim while listening to songs from the Canadian Chronicle album by the Norwegian black metal band Ancient on November 21st, 1998 in Hyvinka. Elg's partners were Terry Johanna Tervishanka from Järvenpää, a 20-year-old man from Montsala, and another from Kerava. Jarno Elg was tracked by the police and sentenced to life in prison. The Hyvinka District Court in southern Finland sentenced the accomplices to 8 years and 6 months in prison. It was said that the 3 people were strongly influenced by Satanism. The court declared most of the details of the case sealed for 40 years. For this reason, only a limited amount of information is available. The criminal investigation started when a leg was found from a dump site, thus giving the name dump site execution to the case. The case was generally described as the most gruesome ending in Finnish history. After the sentences, the media tried to raise up black metal as a scapegoat for the happenings in Hyvinka, whereas the I Return to Darkness fanzine fully supports the ending of Hyvinka and would like to hail in honor all those who participated in it. An article printed by the Norwegian Slayer fanzine stated that it's amazing how Satanists are always so full of strength and never forget to remind us that the weak must be weeded out, yet when someone does actually weed out some weak hypocrite, they are the first to mourn in public. Number 2. Sara Aldrete. Sara Maria Aldrete Villarreal is a convicted Mexican Terminator who headed a substance smuggling and human sacrifice cult with Adolfo Constanzo. The members of the cult, dubbed by the media as the narco-Satanists, called her the godmother with Constanzo as the godfather. The cult was involved in multiple ritualistic endings in Matamoros, Tamaulipas, including the removal of Mark Kilroy, an American student slaughtered in Matamoros in 1989. Constanzo, Aldrete, and the rest of the cult went on the run when detectives discovered their shrine. They found human hair, brains, teeth, and skulls at the site of the executions. Eventually, the police found their hideout in Mexico City on May 6, 1989. After a shootout, Constanzo and one of his accomplices were shot and ended by another member of the cult, apparently at Constanzo's behest. Aldrete was convicted of criminal association in 1990 and jailed for 6 years. In a second trial, she was convicted of several of the executions at the cult's headquarters and sentenced to 30 years in prison. If Aldrete is ever released from prison, American authorities plan to prosecute her for the execution of Mark Kilroy. Number 1. Peter Neers. Truly saving the worst for last. Peter Neers was a German executioner and bandit who was executed on the 16th of September 1581 in Newmarket, some 40 kilometers from Nuremberg. Based on confessions extracted from him and his accomplices under torture, he was convicted of 544 executions. Allegedly, the remains were used in magical rituals. He was believed to be an extremely powerful black magician with many supernatural abilities and for acts of cannibalism. Information about Neers is based on contemporary ballads, true crime reports, and official warrants circulating, as well as the aforementioned confessions extracted under torture. It is unknown whether he actually did end 544 people or whether this was just a confession under torture. Peter Neers was one of the leading figures in a loosely knit network of robber butchers roaming the countryside, a network constantly changing in its composition, sometimes joining together for major raids, at other times splitting up into smaller groups to pursue robberies and terminations on a smaller scale over different areas.